Before we dive into the story, I want to give you some stunning statistics. An estimated 6 out of 10 churches in North America, that's 60%, do not pay for the use of songs played and sang and digitally transmitted in their churches each week. Hi, I'm Stephen Cass, and I'm a worship leader, a songwriter, artist, and author. I've been leading and as a member of a worship team for over 50 years, and I'm still leading worship today. I'm a self-published worship songwriter with over 70 titles in my CCLI catalog, and the author of 5 books written as of 2023. All of my books are self-published, and all of my audiobooks are self-narrated and produced and are available and are free in this YouTube channel. If you want to know more about worship leading and being a worship team member and how to be a worship songwriter and how to self-publish your books, you're in the right place. Please watch to the end of this video because I have an urgent message for church leaders, and it only makes sense if I tell it to you towards the end of the video. If you skip ahead to that section, it won't make any sense because you won't have enough information. Please watch from this point to the end. Today, I'm talking about why I wrote my book, Worship Songs and the Law, How Churches Stay Legal, and How Songwriters Get Paid. So let's get to it. Why you should watch this video. This video is so important. I know it can seem like a boring subject that only talks about legal stuff for a lot of people, but that's not it. Not at all. It is really educational and inspirational information for worship songwriters and highly important and serious business people and leadership, and serious business and people leadership information for church leaders, pastors, and elders. Songwriters and other people listening who are involved in your churches and in music production and other aspects, please get this information to your worship leaders and your technical lead, other group leaders, and church elders. This information must be passed to them so they can get the idea why this is so important. For now, I just wanted to sit back and share with you what's going on in my heart regarding church song use licenses and how songwriters and other song rights holders need to be paid for their work. Yes, songwriters, I have an entire section of this book dedicated to you, and I talk about exactly how worship songwriters can receive song royalties. So I invite you to get the book or listen to the audiobook here on YouTube. And then there's an entire section of this book that is dedicated to 3 of the largest church song licensing agencies and what they offer. Church Copyright Licensing International, CCLI, Church Copyright Solutions, CCS, and One License, OL. Why should you watch this video? What's in it for you? Educational and inspirational worship songwriters. Instruction on how to register your song so you receive royalty payments up to date for 2023. I want this to be an inspiration for you to be an advocate for church song licensing, how you can gain knowledge to share this information with your worship leader and church leaders, and educational inspiration for worship leaders and church leadership. Vital words here for you to relate church song use licensing, background information to elders or pastors or whoever makes the decision in the church to get church song licenses. And this video and book gives church leaders all the basic statistical, moral, scriptural, and legal backing to convince their leadership teams, pastors, elders, and worship leaders, or whoever needs to know, the benefits of church song licensing. Next, how to understand the legal risks a church is taking for not getting church song licenses. Towards the end of this video, under Urgent Message for Church Leaders, I'm going to share with you the latest legal update regarding church risks. Why it matters. But I want to give you the why. Not just the why of my inspiration, but the why as far as it is important to you, what it means to you. This book, Worship Songs and the Law, is written inside a story. And the central character of that story is, you guessed it, Jesus. So, what did Jesus teach about regarding giving people what they are due? What did Jesus mean when he said, "Whose head is on this coin?" And then, pay to Caesar what is due Caesar, but pay to God what is due God. That passage is in the book of Matthew in chapter 22 with the story in the verses 15 through 22. Before we dive into the story, I want to give you some stunning statistics. An estimated 6 out of 10 churches in North America, that's 60%, do not pay for the use of songs played and sang and digitally transmitted in their churches each week. That means that there's an estimated 1.7 million songs, a combination of the same songs and different songs, played and sang, possibly digitally transmitted also, each week in North America. And digital transmission has markedly increased due to COVID. 1.7 million songs times 60% equals 1.02 million songs that are played each week without compensation to the songwriter or to the producers or to the holders of the rights of those songs. So that means that 4 out of 10 churches are paying for the use of that intellectual property, IP. 4 out of 10 churches are paying their fair share, and 6 out of 10 churches are not paying attention to United States copyright law. And that's a far cry from the 0% that paid for the use of these songs in the years past. The book shares how we got from that 0% point to the 40% point and how we can push past the 40% point. If only 4 out of 10 churches in North America are paying songwriters what they are due, what are the risks to churches going forward? I will share those risks later in this video, but I want to turn back to the why. Why should we pay? As I've said, this book is written inside the story of how the Pharisees were trying to trick Jesus, as recorded in the book of Matthew, chapter 22, verses 15 through 22, when they asked him whether it was right to pay the imperial tax to Rome. And he said, "Whose head is on this coin? Pay to Caesar what is due Caesar, but pay to God what is due God." Well, this verse is packed with meaning, but how does it relate to the topic of church song use licenses? Now, even though it's a simple concept, give to Caesar what's due him and to God what's due him, that simple concept packs a punch. There are 2 sides to this answer from Jesus, 2 different points he is trying to make. The answer from Jesus about both are very specific and give good contrast against the other. First off, the whole concept of money and the exchange system and paying taxes is pretty loaded, and what we should pay is an open-ended question, of course, but I think a simple summary statement can be made about this answer from Jesus. He is saying the world and its systems and functions and the how and the whom and the when you pay according to your barter system and your systems of exchange have nothing to do with what you need to pay as far as the respect and honor you need to pay to God in order to live your lives, reflecting on how God would have you act, to show the character of God in all you do. So Jesus would have us reflect on both sides, and if we're wise enough to see it, to reflect on the right side of his answer, to pay to God what is due God, which will influence the left side, pay to Caesar what's due Caesar. So what is this in regard to paying songwriters and rights holders of song for the use of their IP in churches? On the left side, Jesus' answer, pay to Caesar what's due Caesar, we have a statement from Jesus that says we should pay to the system what's due the system. And the system in the United States are the laws protecting the rights of the song IP holders. And the laws are specific about the protection and the uses of songs in public places in the United States. U.S. copyright law for churches. And so that brings up another question. What? Churches are public places in the United States? The answer is yes. But there is specific language in copyright law, Title 17 of the U.S. Code, which protects churches for the use of songs used during services. The following paragraph is taken word for word from the internet address from Christian Copyright Solutions that I'm showing on your screen. And here it is. The Religious Service Exemption, RSC, of the U.S. Copyright Law, Section 110, Chapter 3, Paragraph 3, is probably the most important part of the law for churches because it provides that the performance of non-dramatic literary or musical work shall not constitute infringement of copyright. In other words, you don't have to get permission from the copyright owner or to pay royalties to perform music or to display the lyrics of a work in a religious service. So, copyright law in the United States protects churches while they perform and display a song during church services. The legal side of that is that the other public venues in the United States need to pay blanket song use licenses so artists can come in and perform songs for the use of elevator music, for the use of music on hold, and that you hear in coffee shops and bars and etc. So for any uses of music in public places. But churches are also public venues, but they are exempt from paying these blanket performance licenses. Just on that aspect of this alone, that churches are exempt from paying blanket performance licenses leaves a hole in the system used to pay songwriters their due. Suddenly, songwriters and others who hold the rights to those songs are not being paid for the uses of their songs. Keep this thought in mind for later. We'll talk about this later. Songwriters are not being paid for the use of their songs in church like other songwriters are in this country because of blanket performance licenses collected on their behalf. And some will say, well, no, there's the whole question of church and state separation and the First Amendment, which says Congress shall establish no law regarding religion or the free exercise thereof. Good topics to dive into as far as this part of the equation from the answer of Jesus. And the book, Worship Songs and the Law, dives into these questions more deeply. And I invite you to read more about this in Chapter 1, Why It Matters, of my book. We are called to absorb the character of God. But here's my bottom line position. We can have all sorts of conversations about the left side of the answer from Jesus, pay to Caesar what's due Caesar, but it is the right side of this answer that is the most intriguing to me. Pay to God what is due God, and he intended for that to influence the left side. Should we pay to God any money directly? No, I don't think so. I don't think he would have any use for change in his pockets. So what is Jesus exhorting us to pay God? He is exhorting us to pay what God has required from us from many of his recorded writings about him. From the beginning, God has shown in his stories how he is a different God. He is not like a volcano God that demands human sacrifice. Remember the ark story in Noah. There are other flood stories from the ancient world, but they all end with the God who says, "Watch out, I can do it all again, and next time it will be..." Insert, threat of pain and death here, but no, our God gives us a sign, the rainbow, and says he will never allow this to happen again. Do you remember the almost sacrifice of Abram's son, Isaac? Again, God shows Abraham that he is different from the other volcano gods. In the end, he says to Abraham, "No, don't kill your boy. I know that you truly love me." Our God is not one of human sacrifice like the volcano gods. There are multiple examples of this in the OT, and when you study the original Hebrew language and look for what God is saying and requires of us, you'll find two word families in varying forms again and again. Tzadak, T-S-A-D-A-Q, to make right in a moral or character sense, the true righteousness and character of God, and mishpat, that's M-I-S-H-P-A-T, the act of judgment to reward the good, seeing the true goodness of God. A very telling verse comes to us from the book of Amos, one of the prophets during the days of the Jewish exile, who quotes God in this. And he talks to him in verses 21 through 24, and I am paraphrasing. "I hate your religious festivals. Your music is driving me crazy. You keep bringing me these burnt offerings, but these are no good to me. What do I want? I want oceans of justice, mishpat. Let my goodness and my character, tzadak, flow like a river forever. Let my goodness and my character flow like a river forever." And so God simply wants for us to dispense his true righteousness and to deliver his judgment, which is to reward true goodness, to feed the poor, to feed the poor, to care for the sick, to visit those in prison, and to help to dispense his comfort and his sense of fairness. Jesus is telling his trappers that the coin and the money represents the exchange, the barter system of this world. And Jesus is saying that this money has nothing to do with what we should be paying to God. And what we are to be paying to God is not money, but true allegiance to Tzedak and Mishpat, God's true character of righteousness spread by the act of his judgment to reward the good and to protect the weak. The money systems of this world cannot supply this. Only human capital can supply this. Now, isn't it great when the money systems of this world line up and support the true work of God? Yes, let it be so for his church and for the songwriters and worship leaders who work hard to bring great music to his people. The right side of this answer from Jesus, pay to God what is due God, should help us to decide how we govern the left side of the answer, pay to Caesar what is due Caesar. In our case, church leaders and songwriters need to understand how to follow the laws in this country in regard to paying songwriters and song rights holders what they are due for their work. We as a people need to figure out how to take on God's character of justice and goodness to assure that they are paid for, not only their work, but how they inspire, how they influence and share with us how to grow in the love of God. Yeah, but there's no provision in law to pay church songwriters. Yes, there is a provision in the law to pay church songwriters, but it's up to the business minds of this country to help raise and to distribute the funds. There is no law decreeing that songwriters will be compensated for the use of their songs in churches, but the church exemption law is written in a manner to help. The church copyright exemption states that churches are exempt from paying for the performance and the display of songs during services, but churches, again, public places in the United States are not exempt from copying and distributing songs, both music and lyrics. Churches are also not exempt from the performance and the display and the copying and distributing of songs for their use outside of services, for functions such as coffee shops, bookstores, music on hold, concerts, retreats, youth events, music in the lobby, and those type of things. This is why churches need song licenses. I have the story for you in my book, exactly how a music minister named Howard Rakinski did all the research so Christian songwriters, those that wrote songs for churches, could indeed start to get paid for their work. He established Church Copyright Licensing International in 1984, and he established CCLI for three reasons. 1, to stop lawsuits against churches. FEL publishers sued the Diocese of Chicago for illegal copying of their music in 1984 for $3.1 million. They were sued for copying and distributing, not for performing, but the door was now open for more lawsuits. He also created a payment system to the RIAA, that's Recording Industry Association of America, and the major music publishers for church copying activity. 2, to establish a system so songwriters and rights holders could get paid for their work. CCLI set up a direct payment to member song publishers. And 3, to create a song service for churches. They created Song Select. CCLI pays member music publishers directly from the proceeds of the license fees collected. Remember earlier when I mentioned that since the churches are exempted from paying blanket song performance licenses, that songwriters are missing out on this income? Well, even though songwriters are getting paid from CCLI for copying and distributing for their songs, the payment could be thought of as taking the place of this lost income stream. It's a stretch on the imagination, but the performance income would be lost to them, so this thought pattern works. I am a music publisher and a member with CCLI, and I receive a royalty check from them every 6 months. I have over 70 of my songs published there. I am not getting rich off I am not getting rich off of receiving song royalties, but I make pretty good darn coffee money. And I can use this money for Christmas gifts. This is available for the independent Christian songwriter, and this is how the independent Christian songwriter and music ministries can get on track and get their songs heard in their local communities and around the world. If you are a congregational songwriter or music publisher with songs used in church, I encourage you to learn more about how to become a music publisher member of CCLI. I've written about this in Worship Songs and the Law, but I write about it more extensively in my books, How to Be a Worship Songwriter and the 5 Steps to Get Your Songs Heard. Please visit getyoursongsheard.com to download How to Be a Worship Songwriter for free and receive a coupon code for a steep discount on my other books. CCLI has issued song use licenses to over 250,000 churches in North America and over 150,000 other churches around the world. And I go into detail about what those song church use licenses, which are available from CCLI today, in Chapter 8 of my book, Worship Songs and the Law. Next, here's another way that the law and business has made a way to pay church songwriters. Remember, the church exemption clause in copyright law states that churches are exempt for paying for the performance of songs during church services. That specifically means that churches need to pay for those instances where they use these songs outside of church services, like I mentioned before, coffee shops, bookstores, music on holds, and concerts and youth events, and music in the lobby and the like. Churches that don't comply with copyright law by allowing music performance outside of services are at the risk of being sued. The vast majority of companies and publishers that own Christian music in this country do not care about the spiritual nourishment of the songs and have every right under U.S. law to pursue payment for the use of their intellectual property. When they see that these songs are not covered, they can litigate. While CCLI concentrates on selling licenses to churches regarding the copying and distribution of songs, Christian Copyright Solutions, CCS, is dedicated solely to issuing licenses to churches for the performance of songs outside of church services. Again, this internet address that I'm showing is the same one to the CCS page that describes the religious service exemption and what the company provides to cover the churches for these use of these songs during these other gatherings and events. CCS partners with 3 of the performance rights organizations in the United States, ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. The money they raise from church licenses are paid to these pros, who in turn pay song royalty payments to their music publisher members. If you are a congregational songwriter or a music publisher with songs used in church in the United States, I encourage you and your writers to become members of one or more of these performance rights organizations, ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. You can belong to only one as a writer, but you can belong to multiple pros in the United States if you are a music publisher, and because you can have contracts with writers who are members of either group. And finally, there's another organization that I promote in my book, Worship Songs and the Law, and there are others out there as well, that I want to tell you about today. One License. One License is an organization formed to service the more traditional congregational faiths. Rather than one large song repository, OL links to member websites and song databases. It also collects fees and distributes royalties directly to music publisher members. OL has issued licenses to 30,000 churches and schools and retreat centers around the world for the use of member music publisher songs. OL, like CCLI, concentrates their license offering for the copying and the distribution of songs and other worship aids. These are only 3 of the largest organizations. There are many smaller ones who offer church licenses so church songwriters can be paid for their work. But none of them are in competition with each other. All of them represent different music publishers, and as mentioned, for the difference in the uses of songs used during and outside of services, so church songwriters can be paid for their work. So, the companies that issue song licenses are in place. It is up to you to present this information to your church leadership so they can comply with the law and so songwriters are paid for their work. Urgent message for church leaders. I have an urgent message for church leaders regarding this. Now, if you skipped ahead to this section, what I'm about to say isn't going to make the best sense, so I urge you to watch the video before this point to get the most out of this message. There is a myth that churches won't get sued for song infringement. There are those who still believe that churches somehow have some sort of divine right to use intellectual property that is not theirs. There are those who believe that churches can use whatever music they want and when they want to use it. I respectfully don't agree with you. I go into a lot of this depth in my... I go into this conversation in depth in my book, Worship Songs and the Law, but let me just sum it up by saying it this way. We live in a land with those who believe and those who don't, with those who would steal and those who won't. And they go to church together. The laws of this land are in place to protect the rights of individuals and to protect their property. And in this case, to protect the marketability of the songwriter's intellectual property. The law of the United States, the U.S. Code, Section 17, outlines a way to protect those citizens who operate churches from laws pertaining to the collection of music performance fees for public places in this country, blanket fees charged by ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. And yes, churches are public places in this country. Churches have music played in public, but don't have to pay these fees during the course of services. But they do for any other circumstance. When this law came about in the Copyright Act of 1976, this opened the door for churches to be sued. And the Diocese of Chicago was sued in 1984 for $3.1 million. Thankfully, CCLI was formed to stop many other future lawsuits. But that didn't stop all of them. There's a list of churches who have been sued over the years, but there are going to be more churches sued in the future. Why? In late 2020, the COVID Relief Act passed the Small Claims Creation Act, which was the creation of the Copyright Claims Board. The CCB is a small claims court for copyright infringement with a maximum award of $30,000, and this was formed as an alternative to filing a federal claim. This small claims court is handled online and is ridiculously cheap for anyone to begin litigation. You can file a claim with or without an attorney, for example. Check it out at ccb.gov. That's charliebaker.gov. This is a tribunal, 3 copyright judges rather than a federal court. They began taking cases in June of 2020 and so far have had over 500 claims filed. It's for any type of copyright infringement, not just for music. It turns out that the majority of those filed claims were thrown out due to administrative or other people errors or people dropping their claims, or the claims were dismissed by the tribunal. But I'm getting this information from a site called plagiarismtoday.com. You need to go check this out. Please go look at all of these sites I mentioned today. Church leadership should pay attention. There will be more claims coming against churches, and churches could easily avoid these claims by paying the very reasonable fees associated with church song use licenses. Churches, take care and assess your song use. Here are 3 such lawsuits from the past that could be easily avoided in the future. And all of these are referenced in my book, Worship Songs and the Law. 2002, Edwards versus Church of God of Christ for recording and selling a soloist performance from a church service. The court awarded Edwards $1.6 million in damages. 2002, Malico Incorporated v. Cooper, when a person videotaped 4 songs from a live performance and then marketed that tape without the artist's permission. The court awarded the artist $100,000 plus attorney's fees. 1994, Meadow Green Music Company v. Voice in the Wilderness Broadcasting for the willful broadcast of copyrighted works without the permission. The court awarded $52,500 plus attorney's fees. The station manager pleaded with the judge that the intent was for Christian ministry. So many small churches and the livelihoods of pastors could be destroyed by claims with this new Copyright Claims Board. It's not a matter of becoming a legal expert about songs. And like any other business, churches need to protect themselves from negligence or ignorance. Federal copyright law applies the same to churches and companies. Be wise and discuss your song use with your leadership and build your church on solid legal ground. Church leaders realize that the revenue raised by church song licenses help to pay the songwriter and the music rights holder what they are due because the religious service exemption in U.S. copyright law takes away performance money normally raised for them. It's important that you do this to lead the way for this justice. We as people need to figure out how to take on God's character of justice and goodness to assure that they are paid for, not only for their work, but how they inspire and influence and share with us how to grow in the love of God. A flourishing song ministry in a church can influence all ministries to flourish. Why did I write this book? Because I'm passionate about songwriting and music publishing. I want to see songwriters get their fair shake in this country, and I want my fellow songwriters to understand more, and I want them to become advocates for church song licensing so they can show church leaders how to select and use church song licenses. Let me just tell you right now, yes, law is complicated, but knowing the rights of the songwriter is not complicated. A songwriter creates a work. You've heard it said that legally the U.S. Copyright Office says that the work is copyrighted the moment it is placed in a fixed form. Any form, piece of paper, recording, your phone. Yes, that's it. The work is yours. But in order to take full advantage of all the economic benefits of your work and to fully protect that work, you need to register that with the U.S. Copyright Office. What are the economic benefits to the songwriter? He or she has the exclusive right to reproduce the work, to distribute the work, to make a derivative of that work, to display the work in public, and to perform the work. And now in the digital age, the exclusive right to transmit that work digitally, if the work is fixed in a master recording. So now you can begin to see why music publishers are so interested in managing and owning these rights. They can make money from these rights. And this is exactly what happens when you sign a music publishing contract. The music publisher now owns all of these rights, and they exploit these rights. So it's simple to see. Yes, you are the legal owner of any work when you create it, when it's expressed in a fixed form. You have all of those rights. But the questions arise. What do you do with those rights? Ignore them? Let someone else take them? None of the rights matter to the song, you might say. Anyway, that's the simple part. The complication comes when a music publisher gives you a contract that you have no idea how to read or even what it means. You feel cheated. You feel dirty. You feel like it's okay if I'm stupid about it. At least someone knows what's going on. But what's my background with all of this? Not very many people give a hoot about legal stuff except lawyers and big-time music publishers. But this was something that caught my attention years ago. Number one, just because it just seemed so confusing, I figured there was no reason why it should be. If a songwriter wanted to know the ins and outs of what they owned and with the song, they should be able to know that. But it also piqued my interest because the stories I had read about the early music publishers and then the entire recording industry and music distribution and publishing stories that came from early rock and roll heyday. And that stuff was just really interesting. But my interest started coming into how songs are legal when I first became a self-published recording artist in the late 90s. My first album Wisdom Discovery of the Word, was recorded and distributed in 1998. And I've been recording and in the studio for myself and for my friends since the days of multi-track cassette recorders, tape recorders. So I got a pretty good education about being a recording engineer, which gave me the knowledge as an artist to understand how to produce what I was hearing in the studio and how I wanted my own records to sound. So with that in my back pocket, next I decided I wanted to tackle the understanding of what I owned as a songwriter and what were my rights as a songwriter. Why and how did music publishers make money? Especially when you find out that music publishers aren't creating the songs, so why are they getting paid? It's about this time that most people would just throw up their hands and say whatever, but, especially as artists, most of us just want to create music and play music. We don't want to get involved with all the legal and technical stuff. We just want to have a good time. So, but along comes me, the super nerd. I can't help it. I'm an electronic technician by trade, so sound and studio engineering side came naturally to me. So I became very interested in understanding what I would have to do to get my songs copyrighted and legally to get my songs out there. What were the ramifications of me not getting my songs copyrighted? Could people actually steal my stuff? On the other hand, who in their right mind would want my stuff? But I wanted to be on top of this and to learn. I love learning. And so I did just that. I started reading about music publishing, copyright law, and what it all meant. Okay, full stop. I know, it's getting complicated. And most songwriters and artists will hit the ignore button or say, it doesn't matter to them because they're getting sung. Doesn't matter to them because their songs aren't going to go anywhere. Their songs aren't going to go anywhere anyway. They'll never reach the point where they'll need to understand all the gobbledygook. I get it. I really do. We artists would rather just create. But the more I learned about this, the more I began to understand that Christian songwriters needed to understand. They needed an advocate in this legal arena. Does everybody need to learn about all the copyright legal and all that stuff? No. But those who are interested need a way to easily understand how to get it all done. And I decided I wanted to be that guy that people could turn to for education in this. After I recorded my first album, I started a record label. This label was a combination of songwriters and artists, and we physically published our works to over 15 countries. We distributed songs to Christian radio stations there. So I wanted to do it right. I wanted to be a guy that could answer songwriters' questions about what they own and how they might exploit their rights. I know the word exploit is a dirty term. It has negative connotations, but that's not the way the word is used. When you take economic advantage of the legal rights of your song, it's called exploitation. I expanded the label and got into the distribution business for the compact disc sales for Christian artists. Artists ask me all the time about this or that situation they were in. Should I sign this contract with this publisher? What happens if I do or I don't? And by this time, I was fairly well versed in the language of music publishing contracts. So people would ask me questions in Christian songwriting forums. So I began collecting all of my answers to them and began to form the basis of this book. I've been giving advice on song legal and music publishing matters for several years by writing emails and articles on those Christian songwriting forums. And it's really just difficult to pinpoint why I've had such a passion for so long. Most songwriters, like I said, don't want anything to do with the legal stuff and they just want to create. That's completely understandable. But I find satisfaction in that because of this inkling to dive into understanding music publishing, that I might help fellow Christian artists through some of this knowledge. It brings me joy to help turn on the light bulb for another person. I think that it helps that I enjoy trying to break down the most boring legal talk and hard concepts and putting them into words and pictures that are easier to absorb. I've received a lot of feedback over the years, words of thanks, and that has made it all worth it to me. This book is really a collection of all that research. I mean, the book itself is up to date in the concepts and church song licensing availability, but the core elements of it came from my understanding of how music law changed for the better for the independent music publisher and songwriter with the changes in the Copyright Act of 1976. This is the ground floor for modern church song publishing and how it has turned into the industry that we have for it today. The reason I wrote this book, Worship Songs and the Law, is really just a portion of a much larger narrative that I have written and I am still writing regarding how to be a worship songwriter in the 21st century. I am paving a pathway for the future of Christian songwriters. I see the change that has happened in copyright law in this country and how Christian music has changed because of that, and how churches and songwriters will soar in the 21st century. Along with the local song theology concept, that is, seeing how God is moving in your community and writing and sharing songs about that with your community, I see how songwriters can become involved in their local churches, even though they're not Nashville quality songwriters, and they can come together to learn about songwriters. They can come together and learn about songwriting and contribute. Pastors don't need to wait until the next song comes out of Nashville to have solid songs in their churches describing how God is moving in their communities. We, local songwriters, can do that. We can bloom where we are planted and work for God right in our home communities. We will listen to the Apostle Paul, what he says in 1 Corinthians, and find contentment in where God placed us and to do his work in our home communities. If we're called elsewhere, that's something else. But that's what I'm writing about. Congregational songwriting, leading worship, as a worship leader or anyone who is up on the platform, anyone who is mixing sound at church, and why we are all together and how we can develop into people who can help other people find the foot of the cross of Jesus Christ. This will all culminate in the Worship Songwriting Academy at worshipsongwritingacademy.com, which is a center of education for the congregational songwriter, the faith-based songwriting community administrator, and the faith-based music publishing company administrator. I want to thank you so much for your time today. If you like this information, please hit the subscribe button. Please visit getyoursongsheard.com to pick up this book as well as my completely free introductory book on congregational songwriting. You'll get a 45% discount on any of my books when you download my free book. You can also read more about me, my books, and contact me for speaking engagements at StephenRobertCast.com. Take care.